Ladies and gentlemen, we are back in studio with Eric Boehmer. It is always interesting to me to hear the situations that people have to deal with legally. And there's so many people, they try to represent themselves or go on about it in a fashion that doesn't include, because they're afraid of spending a few bucks to get properly represented, and it causes them much more problems than if they would just done it properly. It's like they say, do it right the first time, right? And how often does that not happen?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the biggest things I encounter is people wanting to save a little money, and if you don't have the money or don't have a credit card, I get it. You got to do what you have to do to take care of yourself the best way that you can, and that's a part of life. But I often encounter folks that think they can save money, think they can. Well, this lawyer was half the price. I'll go with them. Well, that lawyer was half the price for a reason.
Right.
They may have less experience. They may not go to trial, or they don't even want to spend the money at all. And it's just, I keep equating it kind of to medicine. Would you get the cheapest doctor, or would you just not get a doctor because you couldn't afford it? It's not whether you can afford a good lawyer, it's that you can't afford to not have a good lawyer, because the consequences down the road could be way worse in many different ways, including financially. Could cost you way more money down the road not to have had a good lawyer. So yeah, I encounter that quite a bit.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about, just a little more depth and some of the mistakes that people make. But before that, tell us, if you would, what do you think it is that really separates you from the pack? It allows you to stand out for all these awards you've gained. I mean, you've obviously become very well recognized. What is it that Boehmer Law does better than the rest?
Well, one of the big things that I particularly focus on, I try to train my guys, is that you have to be willing, able, and ready to go to trial. And you might watch a lot of TV and think that, well, okay, all lawyers go to trial. That's just not the case. There are a number of lawyers that will go to trial, and particularly in family law, and because there's no jury trial in family law. So there are a number that will, but not all of them like to. So you have to be able to go to trial, and you have to prepare for it, and you have to know all the facts. If you know all the facts, you have them all in your binder, have them all ready to go ahead of time, you are just that much further ahead than the other side. And on my end, on the criminal part, I think the biggest thing is, like I said, it's being able to do trials and to win them. There are, particularly in this area here, in this county, there are very few attorneys that do jury trials. And I do a lot of them. I don't know, I don't keep track, but I would say somewhere around 50 jury trials, give or take. And I've won a vast majority of them, which is pretty unusual. I would think that if you're 50-50 on jury trials from a criminal standpoint, that's considered very good, and I am well above that. I'm probably close to about 90% on winning in jury trials.
Well, knowing you for so many years and the expertise you bring to the table, I mean, it's good to have somebody that can represent people in such a good fashion, because, boy, people are putting so much at stake, and they don't realize that they cut corners. They're really not going to do themselves any favors. With that, let's talk a little bit about it. If you can give me an example, or what's one mistake that is critical that people make, especially when you're talking about criminal law. Somebody has been prosecuted, or they're being charged. They're not prosecuted, I guess, yet, but they're being charged. What's the first big mistake somebody makes as a criminal and says, and then they don't, what's the biggest mistake they make then?
Well, the first thing that we talked about a little bit earlier is probably the huge mistake is they don't contact attorney first. They make statements. They talk to people. And there's a time frame in all cases, but particularly criminal, that most cases want to get wrapped up in. And the longer you take to get a lawyer, the less time the lawyer has to work the case. So I would say that is one of the biggest mistakes is just time. You got to get your lawyer as soon as you can. You don't want to have anything the lawyer says is all part of negotiations, dealing with the case, dealing with the prosecuting judge. Anything you say, you just consider it recorded and used, down the road. So that's one that is by far the biggest mistake. And also, I would say for people is thinking they can do it on their own, not listen to their attorney, and go on their own agenda. And I always ask people, how many cases have you had? How many cases have you been involved with? And, what's the worst case kind of scenario somebody going to say? 5, 6, 7? Most people it's 1 or 2. Well, I've done thousands and thousands of cases. And I know how people react. I know how juries react, how prosecutors, judges react. And when people think that they can do it on their own, that's the big mistake.
Yeah, and if I hadn't seen that personally with a colleague, somebody I know, literally like decided to go on their own and got themselves in a whole lot more trouble. And it was really just because they didn't take the steps necessary. As it came out, they ended up, because they dug themselves a much larger hole, they had to get a high-powered attorney to come in and spend a lot more money to fix the problem. If they'd have just addressed it at the onset, maybe not as much problem.
Yeah, when you have to pay an attorney to, fix a situation, so to speak, it costs a certain amount. But when you have to pay the attorney to undo damage and then start over and redo, that can cost more. So you're not doing yourself any favors in that scenario.
Yeah, not wise. Something that you definitely don't want to take on your own. Talk a little bit about DWI and is our situation here in Missouri, in particular, I guess some Illinois, but focus on Missouri. What's at stake? If you get one DWI, that's bad. You get a second DWI, you get a third DWI. How does this play out in our current legal system?
So it really depends on what happened with each one, but there are so many components to a DWI. There are so many. Your driver's license, your freedom, but it's not just that. It's if you blew more than once, if you refused more than once, if you got convictions, the time frame. One thing people don't know is that years ago they eliminated on a felony DWI, which requires 2 priors that you've pled guilty to, not arrested, you've pled guilty to. Used to be you had to get a third one within 10 years to make it a felony. They eliminated that quite a few years ago. So if you're a young man, you get 2 DWIs when you're 21 and 23, then all of a sudden you get one when you're 40. It can be a felony, and often it's filed as a felony, and people do not realize that. I quite often get individuals who complain to me who are clients, well, why are they holding my past against me? But it's exactly what they do. They use your past against you. They figure that that's an indicator of future behavior. And some of the statutes, like the DWI statute, specifically designed to use your past against you. They give you a nice break on your first one, a little bit more of a slap on your wrist on your second one, and by the time you get a third one, they're coming at you pretty hard. And that's by design.
And a lot of people, they're talking prison time by the time they've got a third one.
It
really
can be, and without getting a lawyer, you likely could get some time. Then you also have the whole issue of you could get your driver's license suspended for 10 years, 5 years, if you're lucky, just a year. So there's a lot of things to think about. And when you get that first DUI, suppose you get arrested a week ago and you don't know what to do. Well, there's 2 components to it. There's a civil administrative opponent, which deals with the driver's license, and there's a criminal component that deals with court and potential jail or fines. Oddly enough, that also can end up in a suspension, but you have both worlds to deal with. And there's time frames on the administrative. If you blow over, you only have 15 days to file an appeal. If you refuse, you only have 30 days to file an appeal. And I quite often see someone that comes in, well, I got court in a week. Can you help me out with this? Okay, did you refuse? Yes, I did. When did this happen? Well, it happened 3 months ago. Well, I could have saved your driver's license for you, but you need to come in the first 30 days in order for me to file this paperwork with the court in order to save your driver's license. And now it's too late. No matter what I do, it can't happen. So if you get into a situation, you aren't sure if it's going to be a case or you had an arrest, it's important to talk to a lawyer so they at least can tell you, hey, if that detective calls you in 2 or 3 weeks from now, tell him you got a lawyer. If you blew or refused, you weren't sure if there was going to be a DUI with it, come in. Then I can file that paperwork to try and safeguard your driver's license. So it's just key to get in there right away. Just like in the medical field, early diagnosis is the key. Same in the legal field. Early diagnosis of what the problem might be can save a lot of headaches, a lot of problems, a lot of missed opportunities.
Right. So if you knew that you had cancer, wouldn't you start to treat that right away? Why would you wait? Because it's not like a lot of people may have something going wrong, cancer, whatever, in their system. They don't know about it. Here, they've got the paperwork. They've been charged. They've got it's sitting in front of them, and they're still sitting on it, waiting for things to roll out. And they're putting themselves. I didn't realize they're putting themselves in so much jeopardy. The longer they wait, the
Yeah.
rules change over time, 30-day limits, and et cetera. Those kinds of things. That's a lot people need to understand.
And people don't know. There's just so much to it. There's so much to it. It's one of the most complicated issues in the legal field because you have two cases working simultaneously. And for example, on the administrative side, say you blew over, and then you had a criminal side. If the prosecutor dismissed the criminal case the next day, the administrative side still happens. It still goes. They are completely independent of each other, but they also derive out of the same set of facts. So it's a little more complicated than your average case.
Wow. Back to getting an expert, somebody who does a great job, who's got a history, a couple decades worth of work in the industry doing this the right way. Talk about to me a little bit about divorce and family law. Divorce is part of family law, I guess, but what's the biggest hurdle most people have to overcome? Especially, I guess, when some people say, "Well, we can do this divorce on our own. We don't need a lawyer." What are some of the big hurdles that mistakes they make when they're going through divorce?
There's two hurdles there. On the nice, easy divorces where you don't think it's going to be a big deal, we think we can do it on our own. Paperwork is a hurdle because if you don't file the paperwork properly, technically the divorce is not valid and it can be reopened down the road, and people don't realize that. That is less of an issue, I think, than some of the other ones, but you get a contested divorce where there's a battle and there's a lot of emotion. That is probably the number one mistake, is emotion. When you get into a divorce, you've got to do your best to turn it into a business decision, right? You got to be able to think clearly. You got to be able to think with a clear business type head. Now, it's still emotional. We're still dealing with families and kids. A lot of it, the distribution of wealth and assets, is a business part. The children is not, but you have to think of it that way, because when people get too emotional and they get too upset or too sad, they don't make good decisions. And that's why it's important to have a lawyer, because the lawyer, although they do emotionally fight for you, they're not in the case. Their emotion is different. They're emotionally invested in you because you're the client and they care about you and they want you to succeed. But they're not emotionally invested in the same way that the client is, because it's not their children. And people, when they're involved in a divorce case, they often make the big mistake of getting too emotional, and they don't listen to their lawyer. They don't take good advice on how to settle things in a good way. Wow,
yeah. Much more to deal with there than most people probably can comprehend, especially when they're going into this. Just get to that expert, Boehmer Law. Boehmer, Boehmer, law.com.
Yep.
Great informative website we've got up there. I'm going to flash it up for everybody to take a look at. But take a look here. Lots of good information here, and lots of good stuff there that people can make sure that they find out about your law firm and what you can do. And here's your fan page. Take a look at the fan page. There are many people who put a lot of information out there, but when you've got 2,800 likes already, in the short time we've all had our little Facebook, you're doing a good job to make sure people are up on what's going on in our community and doing the good work to help everybody. All right, let's talk a little bit more about this with regard to, we talked about divorce within family law. What are the different categories that most people have within family law, and how do you deal with those most readily?
So the divorce is the most common in the startup, so to speak. You got a married family, or it's also called a paternity action if you're not married but yet you have a child. It's kind of the same process. You just don't deal with distributing their assets. You just deal with the child support, child care, and custody. Those are the beginning stages, right? But they're both equally emotional, and they're both the same type process. Now, you also have modifications, for example, when it's kind of like if you get put on probation and you screw up, you get a probation violation. Well, if you have the divorce and you're going along and there's a screw up, then someone will file a modification. Sometimes it's not a screw up. Sometimes you get a big pay raise and you're making more money, so the other side wants to modify the child support. So you had to have a substantial continual change in order to do so. But that is a big part of it, opening up a case, maybe a year, 2, 3 years later down the road to modify it. We've had cases that have been opened, families just cannot stop fighting, and they'll be opened up 5, 6 times over a 10-year period. It's unbelievable. Then you have adoptions, you have juvenile, orders of protection. So there's quite a broad spectrum there that hits with the whole family law.
Well, there's a lot that goes on with a family, and there's a lot of legal pertaining issues. And I guess it could be something that goes on within the neighborhood, within the school district, within the family itself, family members battling each other. I mean, there's all kinds of legal representation there, and you want to have an attorney that specializes in that and has that expertise like Boehmer Law does.
Yeah, I mean, families fight, and that's the bottom line. And sometimes it's not just the husband and wife. Sometimes a grandparent comes in, talk about grandparents' rights, or guardianships get filed. And sometimes the two areas of law, criminal and family law, they overlap. Sometimes you get folks that might get a drug problem. Yes, they might get or an alcohol problem. They might get a DWI or a possession charge, but it also affects their family law case because they're still testing positive for something they shouldn't have. And that will affect their potential custody rights. So a part of what we do is to put our client in the best position to be in front of a judge, whether that means getting them into rehab, getting them cleaned up, getting them some clean tests, and that's all part of it. It's a never-ending battle, in those kind of cases. It's something we have to keep on top of, but quite frankly, once again, it's still up to the client. We can only make them do so much and advise them on so much. If the client doesn't listen, it makes the job more difficult. So once again, one of the most unfortunate instances is when you get a client who doesn't or isn't capable of listening to their advice.
Yeah, take it from the attorney, everybody. They're there to help you. It's going to cost you a little bit, but it's going to save you a lot more heartache and potentially a lot more money, and even your freedom, depending on what type of law you're talking about. Another big important area is something I'm starting to deal with a little bit now. I know people know Braxton went up to the next level, the baseball stadium in the sky. So we're starting to talk about wills and estate planning. How does this play in, and what are the biggest mistakes people make when they're dealing with this?
Well, having a simple will is nice, okay? It's cheap, it's affordable, but it doesn't solve all your problems. It might tell people what you want to go where, but it doesn't make the process very easy for you. And you can end up in probate court, which is a place you don't want to be. Right. So you need to have the safeguards such as family trust, individual trust, spousal trust. You need to have those set up so that things are nice and easy and smooth. So if there is a passing of a loved one in the family, everything is transferred through the trust and under the eyes of the will in the way it should be. That way you don't end up having to go to family or probate court and have to fight it. You don't have to have that crazy cousin come out of the woodwork saying it's all his. You can usually avoid probate almost always if you have a good will and trust set up. And it brings you a tremendous amount of peace of mind to know that there won't be a problem when you pass. Particularly if you have siblings. You don't want to go up into the clouds to see your maker and think about, wow, my kids are all going to be fighting over my stuff. If you set it out, get it all lined up ahead of time, you don't have that problem. Most of the time, you don't have that problem. And it's a nice emotional safeguard as well as a financial safeguard to have everything lined up ahead of time while you still have a good mind and good, spirit about you. And you don't want to wait till you're really old because anything can happen. I mean, a meteor could fall down and hit you, at any part of your life. So the better prepared you are, the sooner prepared you are, the better off you are. And particularly the more assets that you get, it's more important to get protected.
Well said. Yeah, personally dealing with some of that myself on the other end, where somebody was incapacitated, but luckily they made some changes to the will and the outline issues because otherwise other people were going to be involved and money was going to be dispersed, and it was not what they originally intended, and makes things a lot more difficult to do that afterwards, if not impossible, causing a lot more heartache for families.
Very difficult to determine someone's intent after they're gone.
That is true. All right, and we didn't mean to skip this, but it's another important fact or category. Personal injury, kind of the other side of criminal, but if somebody's been wrong, something's happened to them. Talk to me about personal injury and why is it so critical that you get the proper representation in a case where you've been wronged?
Well, the easiest example is always a car accident, right? That's the easiest example because everyone knows it, they understand it, and you have insurance coverage, right? The insurance adjuster that you're dealing with on the other side, and sometimes even your own insurance adjuster that you might have to deal with, it's their job to save their company money. And the way they save money is by not giving you money. So you need a lawyer to draw it out of them and get the most that you can. Advise you on your medical expenses, on your pass of treatment, and to make sure that all the documentation is together. Because if an insurance adjuster doesn't have a piece of information, they can't count it towards your claim. And, there are many instances in which I've been able to come back later on and find more coverage. Your average person, even if they try to work on their own, well, I dealt with my insurance guy or the guy who hit me, and they gave me some money. Okay, here's the multiple problems with that. Potentially, the first one, you probably didn't get as much as you could have. You probably didn't submit as much medical records as you should have to maximize your dollars. You also might have had your own underinsured coverage, which could have gotten you another policy. You might have had a homeowners or umbrella policy. They might have had one. There are policies that you might not have known about or understood how they work to be able to collect more money. I recently settled 2 cases for a couple young ladies that were in a car accident, and I was able to get a recovery, a maximum on some of the policies for the vehicle that hit them, the vehicle that they were in as a passenger, and on their own personal insurance policy for underinsured. So I got 3 separate policy collections for these individuals where they were probably happy with getting something on the first one. They didn't even know about the other ones. So we were able to practically triple their money.
Wow. Back to get the proper representation, make sure you've got the experts that are there to handle this the right way. Boehmer Law, everybody, my good friend Eric Boehmer, serving the St. Charles and St. Louis area. Boehmer Law, BOEHMERLAW.com, 636-896-4020. And you've been over at your building over here off of Highway 70 for, I don't know, is it 20 years now?
Well, in the same area for 20 years, in this building now for 10 or so.
Okay.
Maybe 15.
Yeah, but always in this community, always out doing good things and making. I've seen you at golf tournaments. I've seen you all over doing good stuff to be engaged and help people.
Yeah, we do a lot of charity golf tournaments and charity events. I've become a member of the board on a local charity here, and trying to give back and help folks out. It's just a part of it. Yeah, I think it's a generational responsibility to work hard, bust your butt, achieve success, and then help those around you. It's kind of a pattern, I think, that is a good recipe for success and being a good part of the community.
Well said. Yeah, it's great to see so many people like yourselves doing that to help make a difference in our little community. With that, it leads into the next question I got for you. Tell me a couple instances, without naming names, obviously, where you really felt like you helped somebody. You get to do that every day, I guess. But if you can think of a couple times where you said, here was a tough situation, they were hung out to dry, and we stepped in and really made a difference in their lives.
There's one that stands out to me. I mentioned earlier that some of your clients are innocent, some of them are guilty. Probably more of them guilty than not, at least of something. And then you still have to make the other side prove it, which is a big part of what we do. It's one thing to be guilty of something. It's another to be proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But I had a young man who was charged with a very serious offense. It was statutory rape in the first degree, which was a 30-year sentence, potentially. And this was one of those situations where I don't believe anything had happened. And I think he was completely wrongfully accused. It was depositions. It was a big, long fight, and we actually went to trial. And after the trial, the jury trial, it was a pretty long event. And after the trial was over, we got a not guilty verdict. And I've had many not guilty verdicts, but this one was more personal because I was very confident that the individual was truly not guilty of anything, not just a fact that they couldn't prove it. And now the jury came back in 5 minutes, which was unusual and very happy. But we like to equate things to sports and stuff. I've had big home runs in games, game-winning events and things like that that give you that really big, uplifting feeling, that amazing feeling. I can't imagine a major leaguer hitting a grand slam in the World Series type thing. This victory gave me that same feeling. It was one of the best feelings of my life, and that was early in my career, and that's what really pushed me down the path of doing jury trials. Was really in a way saving people's lives, and it really touched me, and the gratitude really touched me, and that was one that I really sets out, and I love trying cases ever since.
Wow, and it brings to mind, how often do we see this situation where somebody's saying, hey, you're probably not guilty, but you need to plead this because if they get you, it could be a lot worse. And people will essentially throw themselves out to say, all right, I'll take a lesser plea to get, because I was at risk. And this is where they kind of coerce people, it seems like, to say, hey, better do this or else you could end up here. And that's where you took them to court, and that's where you say you learn to go to trial, and where you have an affinity and a great skill for that to really help people, because got him off completely, something that he didn't deserve to be criminalized for.
Absolutely. And being able to do such things like that has also added the ability for me to, when I have folks who are guilty, but I have an opportunity to perhaps win, it helps me to get them a really good deal, right? Maybe a reduced charge, maybe no conviction, and maybe even dismissed completely. But they did it. They knew they did it. We talked about it, but I said they're going to have a hard time proving it. I think I can make this a lot better for you. And we've been able to do that because the other side, the prosecutors, they know that I'm not bluffing. They know I can and will go to trial. And they know that I likely could win. And they don't want to risk that. They want to get something out of it. My client doesn't want to risk actually going to jail, particularly if they did do something wrong. So it gives me the ability to get a really good disposition for them, perhaps better than some others would because of that ability to go to trial.
Important stuff. So tell me the process. What does somebody do to say, hey, Eric, we want to hire you and your firm? What's the easiest way for them to get started?
Easiest way is to call the law office. We've got 6 lines there. I've got many girls to answer the phones there, and we set up an appointment at 636-896-4020. You set up an appointment. It can be phone or in person. The phone appointments sort of took off after COVID, so we kept up with it. A lot of people liked it, and we will give you a free consultation, and you can kind of tell us what's going on with your story. We'll tell you what it would cost you to handle it, what we think might happen, and perhaps even how we think we can go about it without giving too many secrets away. And we make it easy for you. You can come in and pay and meet us face to face. You can do it over the phone, and we can take care of court. It really comes down to the individual. And I tell this to them when I meet with them or talk to them on the phone. It's really about your comfort level. I've been doing this for 23 years. I know what to do. When you sign that check or give that credit card number, I know what happens next. I know what needs to be filed. I know where to go. We'll need to talk again later. We'll need more information down the road, but I know exactly what to do right now. So I don't need you to necessarily come in and do a bunch of stuff early on, but I want you to if it makes you comfortable. If you're the type of person that doesn't want to spend a few grand without seeing the person or, making sure they're real, I'm totally okay with that. So either way, we're happy. We're happy to have you. We got 2 conference rooms to bring folks in and meet them and make sure they feel comfortable with everything, and then we'll get started on it. But you got to make that first phone call. That's the step.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the experts that can make sure you and your family are properly represented and taken care of, because it is something you do not want to put at risk, as there is so much at stake. So get a hold of our friends here, Boehmer Law, BoehmerLaw.com, 636-896-4020. Eric, thank you for taking the time, coming to our studio and share your knowledge and information.
I appreciate it, Gar. As always, it's a pleasure.
Giddy up. All right, everybody, you're watching Your Little Cat.